The next item of business is a debate on motion 309 in the name of Ivan McKee on public service reform, empowering staff, service users and local communities. And I invite members who wish to speak in this debate to press their request to speak buttons. I call on Ivan McKee to speak to and move the motion.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to open this debate this afternoon on public service reform, which I believe will be the defining task of this Parliament. Public service reform is about delivering our vision of a Scotland where citizens enjoy excellent public services delivered to meet their individual needs and where staff providing those services feel valued and empowered to make a difference to people's lives. It is a vision rooted in our beliefs about public services, that they are critical in delivering a fairer future with opportunities for all. They are an asset and an investment and must be protected for the future by investing wisely. And this vision is enabled by more joined-up, integrated services with greater investment and prevention delivered efficiently. And these principles were set out by the Christie Commission and they're embedded in our public service reform strategy published last year. Public service reform is at the heart of this administration. We are not making marginal changes. We must reimagine the state as an enabler, and that means rewiring our public services system to deliver on that vision. And that means listening to and working with communities, those who rely on services and the workforce to make changes and improve service delivery. Presiding Officer, I have high hopes for this debate and I hope I will not be disappointed. We will not deliver the scale of change we need without some consensus across the Chamber. And while we as the Government are brimming with ideas and innovation to transform public services, this Government absolutely recognises we do not hold an exclusivity on good ideas. I look forward to hearing from opposition spokespeople on their perspectives on public service reform and, very importantly, where we can work together. And I also look forward to hearing from backbench colleagues with a wide range of experiences and perspectives on where they see opportunities to make Scotland's public services preventative, joined up and excellent, because that is what the people of Scotland deserve. Presiding Officer, we've already shown what is possible. More than £300 million saved through more efficient procurement over the past 2 years. We're projecting savings of more than £50 million through the rationalisation of estates, with 13 core Scottish Government buildings closed over the last 3 years and more to follow. An extensive programme of automation with over 140 automations implemented, delivering more than £15 million in cost avoidance. Rationalisation of the public sector landscape with the formation of Police Scotland, the Fire and Rescue Service, regionalisation of colleges and more recently the formation of Public Service Delivery Scotland. Legislation that has empowered communities to acquire public assets in our world-leading Community Wealth Building Act. A wide range of effective preventative initiatives, including Child Smile, the Caledonian System, minimum unit pricing, family nurse partnerships, to name but a few. And a rollout of digital services, including the Scott account, expanding people's access to essential services via one single sign-on process, now with 750,000 users. Scott Payment, supporting organisations across the public sector to make faster, safer payments, and the launch this summer of the Scottish Government's MyGov app, allowing people in Scotland to access a range of public services from the convenience of their device. And I'll give way to Andrew Baxter.
Andrew Baxter.
Thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. I'm glad that you got on to talk about prevention, as that's a central tenet of the Christie Commission. And I listened to the Cabinet Secretary this morning on Radio Scotland, and he mentioned prevention several times. But I didn't hear any detail about what he thought that actually meant, particularly since the Christie Commission was published. We've seen a cut in preventative services, particularly in rural healthcare, and I'd be interested to see and hear how he plans to reverse that.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm going to come on and talk about that through the course of my remarks, but briefly, obviously prevention is one of the 4 core principles of Christie. When we published the strategy, the reform strategy last year, we also published alongside that an extensive document outlining all the preventative innovations that have been implemented over that period, and there are many, many of them, and there's an extensive piece of work that backs that up, showing how the numbers stack up in terms of the investment and the return on that. And as we take forward the budget process for 27-28, 28. We'll be implementing a process of tagging spend so we actually know for the first time what is classed as in prevention and at what level that prevention is, and then what impact that is having. Presiding Officer, despite the progress we've made, we have not delivered. We recognise the scale and pace of reform required. The Public Service Reform Strategy identified the systemic barriers we face. Siloed organisations, budget that supports structures but aren't always aligned to services, and culture that can be slow to change. And it sets out the actions we are taking to tackle those barriers, including setting our expectations very clearly of public service leaders to focus on system, not silo, and to empower staff, service users and communities, reforming the National Performance Framework, changing our budget processes so funds flow to where they make the biggest impact and don't get stuck in silos, and ensuring the workforce and communities are part of the reform process, not having reform done to them. Public service reform is about the future of public services in Scotland, how we design them, deliver them and ensure they meet the needs of the people we serve. And this is about driving integration, simplification and collaboration. And that means we must be open to change, changing how our system fits together, where decisions are made, how investment takes place to deliver for people. And we will lay out our plans for public service renewal and the bill that follows in our first 100 days. We know the pressures facing public services: demographic change, rising demand, fiscal constraint, global uncertainty, increasing complexity of need and increasing expectations from the public we serve. In last year's MTFS, we published our assessment of the scale of the fiscal challenge over the next 5 years, and also in the Fiscal Sustainability Delivery Plan, the actions we are taking to close that deficit. Nevertheless, without reform, those pressures will outstrip the resources available, so the choice is clear. We either change how we deliver services or risk being unable to sustain them, and that is a risk this government is not willing to accept. Public service reform is not just about the services of today, it's about stewardship and protecting public services for generations to come. We have to prevent problems before they start, not just respond when they reach crisis point. Poverty, poor health, inequality are not inevitable. They're challenges we can address earlier and more effectively, and when we do so, the benefits are profound. Better outcomes for people, stronger communities and reduced long-term pressure on services. That is why we are committed to focusing on prevention and expanding early intervention, because prevention is not just the right thing to do to improve lives, it is essential for long-term sustainability. Sure.
Of course, the Christie Commission was established in 2011. We're talking about prevention, that was mentioned then. We're talking about joined-up working, that was mentioned then. What is going to be different this time?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I don't know if the member came in late to the debate, but should have heard the first part of my speech. I listed a whole page of things that we've delivered on the back of the Christie work, but we also do recognise there is more that we need to do to take this work forward, and that is the whole point of this public service reform strategy. Presiding Officer, of the four Christie principles: empowerment, prevention, integration and efficiency, this debate rightly focuses on the one I believe underpins all the others, that of empowerment. Individuals shouldn't have to navigate a maze of disconnected services in order to access the support they need. Too often people, particularly those facing the greatest disadvantage, have to tell their story multiple times, undergo repeated assessments and deal with fragmented support. That's not good for people and it's not good for the system. This is unnecessary duplication, stress and waste. Services must organise around the person and their family to understand what is important to them. And our commitment to whole family support is a great example of place-based, person-centred change in action. It's about how we deliver public services to ensure families get the right support at the right time in the right place for as long as they need it, joining up different parts of the system to focus on efficient and effective preventative support for service users. We know that when services are designed this way, we achieve better outcomes and better value for every pound we spend. But achieving that requires significant change at both local and national level, moving away from one-size-fits-all approaches, siloed and crisis-driven responses, towards the design and delivery of support for individuals and families that is more flexible, person-centred and preventative. With regards to empowerment of communities, I recognise the hugely important role of development trusts, social enterprises, supported business and the voluntary sector in the delivery of services at a community level. And that's why we talk about public service reform and not just about public sector reform. Empowerment of communities is absolutely critical to public service reform.
Willie Rennie.
I agree with all of that. It does sound like the Minister's trying to run the whole of government by himself. Can he give us an idea about how he's going to prioritise? Because otherwise I think he's going to get lost. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the members, thanks for his comments. Rest assured, I've got all of my Cabinet colleagues are 100% on board with this, and the First Minister's got his weight behind this very important agenda. Because we've got the strategy, and the strategy lays out everything that needs to be done across 18 work streams. And people said at the start, why is there as many as 18? Precisely for the reason that Mr Rainey identifies there is an awful lot of work to be done here across a very broad front. But that is laid out with more than 80 actions, and we're moving forward on all of those fronts, because it's all important that they come together as we take the agenda forward. So empowering our communities is absolutely critical to this agenda. Communities coming together to address the unique needs and challenges of their local area, and working hand in hand with the public sector and bringing new ideas and fresh thinking about how to deliver better services and improving people's lives. Communities taking ownership and stewardship of lands and buildings thanks to the legislation from this government. Communities being partners in how services are designed and making sure they're focused on what's important to people locally. And our Democracy Matters work has shown us a real appetite for people to have more control and influence over how services are designed, and importantly how money is spent. And service delivery must also adapt to meet the unique needs of rural, island and of course urban areas. And our single authority model, working with island communities, is leading the way on how integration of services locally can improve service delivery. And by empowering communities further, we will build capacity in all of our towns, villages and neighbourhoods to do more, making public services more agile, responsive and accountable to the people they serve. Public service reform is also very importantly about unlocking improvements and empowering staff who work in our services and who know them best to come forward with ideas to make services better and their work more fulfilling. Let me be clear, a culture that doesn't empower staff and leaders who do not see this as central to their role must change. And organisations that are excessively hierarchical with multiple layers of management, stifling innovation, needs to change. And we work very closely with our trade union partners to deliver this change. Presiding Officer, no one who uses public services or who works in them would say that they are as streamlined or as seamless as they should be. Everyone can identify waste in the system. That is why efficiency is a core part of public service reform. Tackling duplication, sharing services across organisation, making better use of data, digital tools and our public estate, and being honest about where we can improve. That's why we've set ambitious targets. Every pound saved from doing things better is a pound we can invest in care, education and communities. This is not something government can do alone. Partnership is required with public bodies, local government, trade unions, businesses and communities, and indeed across parties in this chamber. And everyone today will want to provide excellent public services. Every party recognises the need for change, although, to be fair, some have articulated it in their amendments more coherently than others. And this Parliament can come together to deliver the change that is needed. And I'm more than happy to work with colleagues that are here today to make this possible. So I'd invite you to work with me, give me your positive ideas, and let us ensure public services continue to meet the expectations and needs of the people of Scotland. And I move the motion in my name. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
I call on Michael Mara to speak to and move Amendment 309.3 up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to move the amendment in my name because it sets out very clearly, as we did in the election campaign just a few short weeks ago, that Labour believes our public services are in need of widespread root and branch reform. And we believe that the shape of the Scottish state needs to adapt to the reality of three accelerating major trends that our citizens are living every day: demographic change, technological change and climate change. And where change led by this government meets the core principles that we have laid out in this amendment today, we will work constructively with the government to deliver on them. But I have to say that at the outset, the SNP's £4.7 billion fiscal gap will loom large in this discussion today in two significant ways. And I would say to the Minister, just as he did mentioned in closing there, that every pound saved is about reinvestment in other purposes. I'm not sure I entirely agree, Minister. Most pounds being saved are about closing the £4.7 billion gap between the spending plans of this government and actually what the government can afford to actually spend. That is the spending trajectory that he has set, along with his colleagues, and the amount of money identified by the Scottish Fiscal Commission. And it has led us to 3 emergency budgets in the last 4 years from this government. And the SNP are late converts to the need for reform, and it's principally on that basis. But I would say that that gap being the animating principle for the programme is a dangerous place to start, because it can lead to the wrong decisions driven by greatest short-term savings rather than long-term efficiency or a vision for where the state might go. What we do require, I believe, in this debate is a sense of destination. What is the government's vision of a modernised Scottish state for the third quarter of the 21st century? I've never heard it, let alone seen it described. If the Minister wants to give me it, I'd gladly hear it right now.
Cabinet Secretary.
And Michael Marra talks about fiscal sustainability being the driver. That, of course, is an aspect, but to be very clear, the driver, as I've articulated in my opening remarks, is around about delivering excellent joined-up public services that are preventative in nature and empower staff, communities and service users to help to deliver those.
Michael Marra.
I would say 2 things to that. I'd be a little bit more believing of the Minister's views, and I'm sure he is a keen advocate for this. But we have gone for 20 years now without the SNP substantially reforming the public sector in Scotland. There have been some reforms, but it clearly has not met the trends that are required and the scale of transformation. I'll come back to that. But it would also result, I'm afraid, in a management consultancy strategy that is very likely to gain the buy-in of the public if we don't have that idea about what it's going. Because all we had there was really some adjectives about what it could look like, rather than actually a description of the shape of the kind of services that we absolutely require. And if I can give the example of health service reform, the recent division into 2 boards across Scotland, of East and West, has been done without any real explanation as to why that has been put in place. And I have to say it came as a huge surprise to leaders in our NHS across Scotland, and was also imposed without any form of consultation on the trade unions. So not meeting fair work principles from the outset. I think it's a good example of how not to do this. Well, whether there's a case to do it or not is not the question, but the process that the Minister is setting out in the strategy and his speech today has not been followed on that basis, and we would be concerned about it. And I would say to the Minister the empowerment of citizens. I fundamentally believe, and he knows that, I've told him that actually my vision of a future Scottish state is very much where citizens are empowered, where they own their data, where they have control of it and they understand what's happening. But that does require a broader vision of the technological implementation of that, and I find it lacking in the strategy. And Willie Rennie is also right to talk about prioritisation. It's really difficult for Parliament and the public to see where any of this is working if we don't understand what success would actually look like. Tell us what a service will look like. Tell us that a service will cease to exist. Tell us something specific so that we can hang our hats and understand whether the government is making the progress, rather than just around the fiscal savings, which I think are at the heart of this question. Because change itself is, of course, not cost-free. And it's precisely why when the UK Labour government was elected in 2024, I met with the then Cabinet Secretary for Finance and said that this was the moment, a moment of significant increase in public investment. This was the opportunity for rapid change. In fact, it was a unique opportunity. She looked at me like I had walked out of a spaceship. The very idea that rather than getting out of the lift to the ministerial corridor, this was a completely alien concept to the SNP. And that's because for 20 years they were elected in 2007 on the basis of no reform, and they have pursued that throughout. So there's much more that we could say about all of this agenda, Presiding Officer. It's a huge challenge. The preventative nature, I absolutely agree with. Delayed discharge has cost this country billions of pounds, but it's because there was no reform to health and social care when it was clearly needed on the basis of demographic trends under this government. I've closed, Presiding Officer, in the 2 practical things that we've asked for in our amendment today: a timetable for reduction in public bodies. After 5 years, I still trip up every week over new ones, which I have no idea what they actually do. And we were also looking for an understanding of the displacement effect of the withdrawal of public capacity in our third sector. I think it's vital that we have that explained by government. These are practical things the government could be doing right now in setting this framework on better footing. I look forward to the other contributions in the debate today.
I call on Malcolm Offord to speak to and move Amendment 309.4.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I am pleased to move the motion in my name on the order paper. And I would start by congratulating Ivan McKee on his appointment. This role could actually be the most interesting in the Parliament in the next 5 years, and if he delivers it to the targets and beyond, he can make a significant contribution to the welfare of Scotland. Public sector reform is the subject. The clue is in the name. Reform UK absolutely believes in reform in every area of public life. And we'd start by looking at the actual headline numbers that has been running in Scotland since devolution began. We've just had the 25th anniversary of devolution. It's always a good time to review what's happened, the good, the bad and the ugly. And if you look at the total spending for Scotland across Westminster and Holyrood, in the year 2025, that was £117 billion. Now, £72 billion of that is spent in Holyrood, so Holyrood controls 60% of the total budget for Scotland, £117 billion. But if you look at that in 1999, that figure was £35 billion, which means that over 25 years, we've had compound annual growth of 5% per annum, 5% growth in spending in Scotland. By any measure, that cannot be described as austerity. That is year-on-year growth of 5%, effectively organic growth in the spend in Scotland. So the issue is not the amount of money, but how we spend the money, what the choice is being made around that £117 billion, and particularly the £72 billion spent here in Holyrood. Now, it's worth taking some comparisons.
Willie Rennie.
It's interesting what he says. From his extensive experience as a Conservative Minister in the UK Government, what can he teach the Chamber here about reform of public services across the UK, and particularly within his portfolio?
Malcolm Offord.
Thank you, Willie Rennie. I'm going to be delighted to cover that, because that's some of the insights that I was able to glean when a Minister in the UK Government. It's part of the reason why I left the Conservative Party, for that very reason. And I'll come to that directly. If you look at the £117 billion spent in Scotland, that's 55% of GDP. Now, in the UK, total spending is 44 going to 45% of GDP. So Scotland's spending considerably more per capita than England. And the exam question is, are we getting better public services? Are our schools better? Are our hospitals better? Are our roads better? Is our policing better? And in fact, if you look at New Zealand, same population as Scotland, 5.5 million, they spend 42% of GDP versus our 55%, and yet their GDP per capita is 10% higher. So what that tells me is that this is not about money. It's not been a shortage of money. What's been a shortage of value for money for the taxpayer. And that is where Ivan McKee can intervene and perhaps direct
Cabinet Secretary.
And New Zealand example is instructive, and of course the big difference is that as a country of 5 million people, New Zealand is a normal independent country and doesn't have many tens of billions of notional spend allocated to its accounts that's spent actually in Whitehall.
Malcolm Offord.
And of course the response to that is that Scotland does spend £117 billion but raises £87 billion in taxes, so there's a £30 billion structural deficit paid for by the UK Treasury. So you can take that comparison either which way. What I would suggest to the Minister is that what he's outlined in terms of AI, digital, etc. improvement, I would consider that ordinary course of business. That is how any department should be running. It should be running to maximise its efficiency on any budget. That should not be considered groundbreaking or revolutionary. What I would encourage him to do is begin to start immediately and look at where we're wasting money, where there's duplication of money, where we're not getting value for money. And I'll give 3 quick examples of that. As referred to by the member, Michael Mara, we've got the Quangos, obviously 132 of those, spending £6 billion. We can talk about the money all day long, but what's interesting is the democratic deficit of how the country is run, with ministers not being able to control spending because it's now at arm's length. And I saw this firsthand, to come to Willie Rennie's point, when I was Minister in DBT, and I was given the brief of trying to deal with the compensation for the post office workers. And what I saw over the last 20 years, when I unravelled it, was a complete disconnect in the lines of authority between ministers and an arm's-length body that behaved on its own account and did its own thing. And the result of that was the postmistresses and masters could not get accountability. And there was actually no point in firing the Minister, Ed Davey, because I wasn't in control of it in the first place. So quite apart from the money, can we please bring the services back in to control under Ivan McKee so you can actually say value for money. When he pulls a lever, you can see where the money comes from. Secondly, in energy, we know that energy is a devolved matter to Westminster. So why is it that this government spends £5 billion on net zero? And again, you cannot find that line. You cannot push a button in the public accounts of Scotland and get that number spitting out at you. You've got to do quite a lot of work, to go through quite a lot of places. But what you will find is that in the current 26-27 financial year, the Scottish budget commits over £5 billion, described as record investment, to climate action and net zero measures. In the context of a £72 billion budget, that's approaching 8%. I would direct him in that direction as well. And the third area I'd direct him to is in the area of welfare. That if, and we all in this chamber believe in the welfare state to help those as a safety net as they move through life, and particularly we need to do a lot more to help people who have fallen out of the way of work to get back into work. I want to hear a lot more about that, about the effort we put into helping our colleagues and fellow citizens back into work. But the issue with welfare is, if you look at the last 10 years, the choices made by the SNP government, particularly under Nicola Sturgeon government, where she created a welfare economy, was that the biggest spending department in this chamber was 15% to welfare versus 3% to education. And that welfare budget is out of control and heading towards having 1 million Scots of working age not working. That is a national disaster for all of us. So that would be the third area that I'd point to Ivan McKee. At the end of the day, the Minister, Ivan McKee, has been in business. And that is a good thing. We need more people in business in this chamber. He will know that any business can save 5% of its costs without directly impacting its top line. 5% of 72 billion is £3.5 billion. That goes a long way to fixing his budget, and he will be commended by the Scottish people for that. So with that, I commend this motion. Thank you.
I now call on Lorna Slater to speak to and move Amendment 309.2.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. Reform of public services means making sure our public services are sustainable long-term. It also means making sure that they are delivering what we need them to, including healthcare free at the point of need. Poverty is expensive. Not only is so much human potential lost when children grow up in poverty, lacking the opportunity to thrive, but health outcomes are worse and social structures are more fragile. We all then have to pay the costs to repair that damage. And while I'm sceptical about the focus on AI in the government's reform strategy, I do support the Cabinet Secretary's emphasis on prevention. Preventing children from growing up in poverty will alleviate much of the strain on our public services down the line. Simple things like ensuring our children have enough healthy food to eat while they're growing up lessens the strain on the NHS in the future. I absolutely do not support Labour's approach, which they have set out in their amendment, that a list should be created of all public bodies and that someone, possibly the Cabinet Secretary, should look down that with a black marker and cross out organisations to satisfy Scottish Labour's desire to make cuts. The Scottish Greens believe that reform in our public services should be worker-led. Reforms should be designed by the frontline workers who deliver the services, by the communities who depend on them, not by someone sitting in St Andrew's House with a whiteboard and a black marker pen. The Scottish Greens believe that public services should be under public ownership and should not be run for profit. We would bring more of Scotland's buses back under public control, and we would support publicly owned ports as key economic drivers of the energy transition to develop local supply chains, bring oil and gas workers into new opportunities, and diversify our marine economy. There is a larger conversation to be had about what are the responsibilities of the public and private sectors. For too long, private companies generate profits while polluting our environment. Pollution and litter that our councils and other public bodies have to clean up at the public expense. Industries should pay to clean up after themselves. The polluter pays. If the public purse is stretched, that's the first place we should look for money, whether it is through taxation of polluters or extended producer responsibility schemes like the deposit return scheme. We can no longer afford to subsidise polluters. This also goes for carbon emissions. The Scottish Government, through tree planting, peatland restoration and carbon capture schemes, is spending and will spend a lot of money trying desperately to pull carbon out of our atmosphere. It would be much cheaper to prevent those emissions in the first place by removing the direct and indirect subsidies for producing them. Of course, we'd know more about who is receiving public subsidies and what they're doing with them if we had a complete land registry. It is urgent that Scotland's land register be completed and that a comprehensive and publicly accessible online map be created. And I'd be very interested to hear in the Cabinet Secretary's view on the importance of this. The Scottish Greens believe that public money can be more effective if conditions are attached to it. We would make Fair Work First conditions mandatory for public procurement, grants and economic development funding, ensuring that no company in receipt of public money uses exploitative practices like fire and rehire or zero-hours contracts. The Scottish Greens believe that public bodies should have clear duties to protect the environment, build resilience to climate change and uphold human rights. Reform to the public sector must embed these duties throughout. In the last term of Parliament, I was part of the cross-party SPCB-supported body's Landscape Review Committee, and I would like to highlight for the Cabinet Secretary two of the recommendations of that work. While the committee was tasked with reviewing the SPCB-supported landscape only, this small fraction of the public sector should not be seen in isolation of the wider public sector. The evidence is clear that many of the measures we are recommending in this report could also be applied more widely. In particular, while we welcome the Scottish Government's public service reform programme, we were surprised to learn about a lack of understanding of the functions and potential overlaps and duplication among the public bodies it funds. We therefore recommend that the Scottish Government urgently undertakes a strategic mapping exercise to identify the functions of all Scottish public bodies and where they overlap, to inform decisions on future size, structure and coherence across the public sector. Certainly.
It strikes me that this is precisely what we're describing in our amendment, that actually we understand the shape of those public bodies and we decide where there's duplication and we stop doing some of them. I mean, if your committee sat on and said it was a good idea, will you vote for the amendment?
Lorna Slater.
Your amendment specifically says about cutting public bodies, not about making sure their remits don't overlap. That would be changing the remits of the public bodies. Now, it may be that in the course of consultation and with workers, there may be decisions made to change the number of public bodies. But for Labour to come in right off the bat with let's cut some before we've even asked questions, before we've even done the mapping exercise, seems to me to be putting the cart before the horse and is hardly the worker-led reform that we're after here. But finally, Presiding Officer, as with so many aspects of governing in Scotland, we can only do so much because of the limitations of the devolution settlement. We can try to implement matters like the polluter pay, but we can be vetoed by the Internal Market Act. We can try to do things differently on taxation or benefits to increase revenue or improve outcomes, but we will always be trying to fight poverty and climate change with one arm tied behind our back. It is clear to the Scottish Greens that public sector reform must be accompanied by a greater devolution of powers to Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I call Murdo Fraser, who is joining us online.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I should explain, due to a family issue, I'm having to contribute remotely today, otherwise I would be in the chamber. And can I start by welcoming again Ivan McKee to his new role as Cabinet Secretary for Public Service Reform. I know he's very keen to dispel the notion that he's here as an axeman to make cuts to public services, or even Ivan the Terrible, as my colleague Megan Gallagher suggested some weeks ago. But I think we do need some clarity from the Scottish Government as to what public service reform actually means. When in debate last week, I challenged the Scottish Government on how they would address the looming £5 billion black hole in the public finances. The Cabinet Secretary's response to me was that it would be public service reform. But in other interviews, he's made it clear that public service reform is not about making cuts. Now, Both these statements cannot be true at the same time. And that's why we need some clarity on what exactly reform is intended to deliver and how that £5 billion black hole will be filled. And yes, I'll give way to the Cabinet Secretary.
Ivan McKee.
Yeah, I know I've been through this a number of times with Mr Fraser, but we'll go back through it again for his benefit. First of all, in terms of what he calls the black hole, that is a projected gap based on projecting past spending patterns into the future. And as he well knows, the Scottish Spending Review published last year identified over that 5-year period how in each of those years the Scottish Government would close that gap, as it's called, to make sure that income balanced expenditure. So that's already been laid out. In regards to public service reform, we need to understand the difference between cuts to services, i.e. delivering reduced or less services, and being more efficient while delivering the same or better services. And this is about taking waste out of the system, which I'm sure he will agree exists, in order to make those services more efficient.
Well, I thank you for that response. We'll come on to waste in a moment. I've got some suggestions to make, but I would just refer him to today's Accounts Commission report on local government, which highlights the scale of the cuts the Scottish Government has passed down to councils over the last 19 years they've been in power. And I hope that's not a model that the government intends to follow. And we can't ignore the fact, looking at this whole agenda, that the SNP have been in power now for almost 2 decades. So they've had 19 years to start addressing this issue. And as my colleague Megan Gallagher reminded the Chamber just a few moments ago, the Christie Commission reported on this in 2011, 15 years ago, 15 years on, and we're still hearing about the need to make progress on the same themes of prevention, joined-up services and efficiency, but little progress has been made. So the government can talk a good game on this, but it needs to start actually delivering. And the SNP have promised before to shrink the state, but it has grown bigger and more expensive. In June 2025, the then Finance Secretary, Shona Robson, set a target to reduce public sector workforce by 0.5% a year, but by the fourth quarter of 2025, the headcount was higher than it had been the year previously, at 601,600. And she'd already pledged to reduce the public sector workforce in 2023, but it has continuously increased. And the devolved civil service alone has grown by almost 60% since just 2018-19. So what should the Scottish Government do? In the spirit of being helpful, let me give the Cabinet Secretary some practical suggestions as to the way forward. Firstly, I think, and this is in line with the comments made by Michael Mara and others, there needs to be a comprehensive assessment of the number of public bodies in Scotland and whether there is any duplication or room for rationalisation. Even the Information Commissioner has said he is astonished at the number of public bodies there are in Scotland and keeps finding new ones he didn't know about. And each one of these independent bodies, whatever the value of the work they do, each one needs to have its own board, its own chief executive, its own finance director, its own human resources, its functions, its own audit and its own reporting. In the field of economy alone, when we produced our manifesto just a few weeks ago, we identified there were over 100 different organisations offering business advice. So we need to see a simplification and rationalisation of the landscape, and considerable savings could be made if we went down that route. Secondly, the Scottish Government needs to reconsider its policy on no compulsory redundancies, because relying solely on voluntary severance can mean the public sector can be left employing people whose jobs have effectively disappeared and cannot be redeployed elsewhere into valuable roles. Thirdly, we need to look at the whole public sector estate and whether there can be much better sharing of resources. Now, we want to see more public servants back in the office working on a hybrid model, rather than the default being just working from home. But even with that, we have substantial buildings sitting underutilised, and we could see significant rationalisation and cost saving through sharing. And that sharing shouldn't just be at a Scottish Government level, it could also be with local authorities or indeed UK government bodies and agencies, and we could start with international offices, for example. I'll happily give way again if I get the time
I'm
back.
afraid, Cabinet Secretary, I'm afraid Mr Fraser's in his last minute or so, if you don't mind. No.
Okay, well, perhaps the Cabinet Secretary can respond in the wind-up. I'll cover a couple of points quickly. Fourthly, focus on frontline services. You know, cut out. Do we really need to have an army of diversity, equality, and inclusion managers in every organisation? And fifthly, end this practice of funding supposed arm's-length charities through government. These so-called charities that almost entirely depend upon government funding for support and use that money then to lobby the government for policy change. I'm thinking, for example, of the Equality Network as a very good example. People want to lobby the government, do it at their own money, not at taxpayers' expense. So, Presiding Officer, we want to see...
You must wind up, Mr Fraser.
We want to see that black hole in the public finances closed. It needs to close. We need to hear the meat from the government as to what public services reform means. That's the point made in our amendment today, and I'm very pleased to move it.
Thank you. I now call David Green to move and speak to Amendment 309.1.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I begin, of course, by welcoming the Cabinet Secretary to his new role and wishing him well. As we have already heard, Mr McGee has been handed what may become the defining task of this government, and that is tackling the £5 billion black hole in Scotland's finances. And as Murdo Fraser has just said, while the Cabinet Secretary insists that his role is not about cutting frontline services, time will certainly tell. Deputy Presiding Officer, it is often said that voters are never wrong, and as my colleague Willie Rennie said in his opening remarks at this session, between the low turnout and a rejection of some of the established parties, it's clear that people are pretty fed up. They are working hard, they are playing by the rules, yet things are simply not getting any better. So we are in an urgent need for a change in approach. And Liberal Democrats are therefore encouraged by some of the First Minister's comments at the Prospers Annual Forum last week. He is right to say that our planning system is broken and it needs to work better. He is also right to say that we need to change how public services are delivered, starting from the needs of the citizen, the business and the community. But I have to say, I'm going to warn the Cabinet Secretary that he does face an uphill struggle to rebuild public confidence, particularly in rural Scotland. I agreed with what Michael Mara had to say, that we need to recognise there's been almost 20 years of an SNP government, and some contrition about what hasn't gone right or what hasn't been reformed would have been welcome. And I have to say, so, too often when it comes to reform under this SNP government, it's often been code for ever greater centralisation. So take the centralisation of the police, which led to the closure of the Inverness Control Room and the loss of local operators with a detailed knowledge of our communities. The one-size-fits-all approach within Scottish Fire and Rescue that has left stations in North West Sutherland in effect unavailable for years, or the long-term trend of concentrating specialist healthcare in the Highlands, an overstretched Raigmore Hospital, or worse, losing services altogether, not least vascular care, an issue that I know Edward Mountain from the Conservative Party raised in the last session. As I said in my first speech to this chamber last week, Liberal Democrats believe that the best decisions are made when local people are empowered to make them. I therefore welcome the intent shown in the Empowering People, Places and Communities workstream. However, I urge the Scottish Government to go further and give my constituents greater reassurances by using its Rural Renewals Bill to put rural proofing into law. Turning to the Cabinet Secretary's commitment to make public services more efficient, I will use my time, or what I have left of my time, to focus on one key area, which is social care and delayed discharge. It is quite astonishing that our NHS is losing 1.2 million a day because on any given night, around 2,000 patients are stuck in hospital. These are people who should be cared for in their community at a simple fraction of the cost. So if we are serious about tackling delayed discharge and reducing pressure on the NHS, the Scottish Government must deliver on its commitment to join up services. So in the Highlands, Highland Hospice and the End of Life Care Together partnership is a great example. Between May 23, and I see Jenny Minto nodding, between May 23 and September 24, people who accessed their helpline spent more than 4,000 fewer days in hospital, generating savings of up to 3.8 million. So with investment of around £1 million a year, Highland Hospice estimates it could deliver that service right across the Highlands. That's a compassionate choice. It would reduce delayed discharge. It would save money, which I know the Cabinet Secretary is looking to do, and ensure more people receive the care that they want, where they want it, which is at home. So in closing, I commit the Liberal Democrats to holding this government to account and work constructively where common ground can be found. But we must be guided by the principle of empowering local communities, not a one-size-fits-all approach, and therefore I move the amendment in my name.
We now move to the open debate, and I call Alan Smith to be followed by Don Black. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I would congratulate Ivan McKee, who I'm going to call Super Ivan, given the scale of what his task's actually going to be on his speech and the vision that he set out today. And I think, speaking to colleagues and listening to colleagues from across the chamber, I am struck that there is a lot of common ground here, and I really do think we need to explore that. I'm also struck that talk of black holes and gaps, and the SNP's failed to do this for 300 years, misses the point and misses the opportunity. The black hole is predicted, if nothing else changes, things are going to change. We're all agreed on that. Equally, we miss the opportunity that we have an opportunity to redesign the state. That is a significant opportunity for all of your parties individually, and I would say to you, the SNP is going to do this. Come and be part of it. There are things that we can work upon. I've read the manifestos of the other parties. All of us in this chamber stood on a platform of change of one sort or another. We all know that what we're doing needs to change, and that is a huge opportunity to redesign the state, to take a fresh sheet of paper. What services do we need? What structures will best deliver them? Empower citizens and staff, crucially, empower staff to decide what those services should be and design the structures that will best deliver them. And everything is on the table. Everything has to be on the table. And it's not about filling a gap or reducing the headcount. That misses the opportunity. It's about doing things more effectively, more efficiently, and delivering better services for the people we all serve. Identifying the need, designing the service. I personally am deeply agnostic on how we deliver those services and what structure is necessitated. I'm game for changing everything, be that state, third sector or private. And the point about the SNP could have done this, yes, it could have done this. But you know what? I'll take that criticism. I will accept that criticism. Often things couldn't be changed because there wasn't support in this chamber to do it. But you know what? We can talk about 19 years of failure, as some people would say, or we can accept that the elections happened, the SNP was massively endorsed by the people of Scotland, and we've all got a job to do, and we've got common ground to do it. So how about we raise our game and think about the future? I will take that criticism, but there is a lot that we can do together. So I would say to the other parties, this is an opportunity. Michael, please.
Michael Martin.
I appreciate the member giving way. I would point gently to the fact that his party had an outright majority in the Parliament for one of those parliamentary terms. So not having the numbers isn't a foolproof excuse. And he will find common ground, I think, across the different areas. I suppose my note of caution to the member would be that if we set the closing of that fiscal gap at the front end, we could come to the wrong decisions. Would that not be the case?
Alan Smith.
I'd agree with that. And this is my point about a fresh sheet of paper. There is an opportunity to do this. The First Minister is behind this. We have a Minister who's a Cabinet Secretary who's empowered to do this. And we know it needs to be done. So let's do it. We won't agree on everything. We can't agree on everything. But there are things that we will agree on, the need for change. Let's see about pushing that through. So if we're looking for ideas, then I would commend the Enlighten Manifesto to the Chamber. It's got a number of excellent ideas in it. I don't endorse them all. The whips will be glad to hear. But I do think there is a good job of work there with some fresh ideas to actually take forward. And it's a challenging read for all of us, because if we're willing to actually think new thoughts, let's do it. But while we're at it, let's think about some difficult questions, and to demonstrate just how keen I am not to administer the status quo. Forgive me, Murdo Fraser, I need to make some progress. While we're thinking about not changing the status quo, I was not elected, I did not come into Scottish politics to administer stuff. I came into Scottish politics to change the face of Scotland because I didn't think Scotland was working as well as it could. Now, I believe independence is a big part of that change. Others don't. Fine. But if we can agree that change is necessary, let's get on with it. So some questions of my own. We have local government in Scotland that's neither local nor government. Much of its money is spent before it gets there. Hard-working councillors up and down the country of all parties are trying to do their best, but they're operating with their hands tied and they're not responsible for their budget. The Forth Valley local authorities are working very hard together, Stirling, Clacks and Falkirk, but we need an honest discussion about what local government is for. Our planning system is frankly not fit for purpose. It is holding us back. It is slowing down development. We need to accelerate it. Health boards. Why do we have so many? What value is actually being added here? Is it more effective? I think we can restructure that. We also don't have a national health service. We have a national illness and accident service. Surely we need to be getting to preventative spend to make people live healthier lifetimes. We have integration joint boards that are struggling right now, and they're going to struggle even more into the future. On schools, why are stretched local authorities operating schools? Surely a national framework with greater local accountability for head teachers, running the primary schools and better connected with colleges for lifelong learning would give better skills as the world changes around us. We have got a huge task underway, colleagues. Think about it and it makes your head spin. But it's a challenge for all of us that we all share. And if we all accept that we need to work on this, let's do that. And let's not think about what hasn't been done, but let's think about what we're going to do. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Can I? We have a number of first speeches in this session, so I'm going to remind people that the convention is not to intervene on a first speech. And I call Don Black to make their first speech.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I refer to my register of interest that I'm also a councillor at Aberdeenshire Council. And it is an absolute pleasure to be here in this chamber representing the people of Angus North and Mearns, and I thank the hard-working activists that did so much in the campaign to ensure my election and to those that placed their trust in me. And I also pay tribute to my predecessor, Marie Goujon, who represented this constituency for 10 years, as well as serving as Minister for Public Health and Sport and latterly as Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands. From steering through historic land reform legislation to leading significant agricultural reform, Marie demonstrated the power of kindness and respect in politics, while always striving to build consensus across the chamber. She brought an incredible energy to her roles, and I can only hope to match it. And as many of my colleagues have done in their first speeches, I am claiming the best constituency in Scotland, a constituency that has a little bit of everything, from incredible beaches and historic fishing harbours, to market towns, an industrial port, a small city, beautiful glens and a Monroe. I moved to Stonehaven in the north of the area, aged 13, when my family circumstances and my father's job brought him to work in Aberdeen as part of the oil boom in the mid-1980s. It is in my soul, and despite having spent some time away living overseas, it is and always will be home. At its most northerly point stands the iconic Dunnottar Castle and the historic Stonehaven, Oultoun and Harbour. Then we have the How of the Mearns, home of one of Scotland's most famous and loved writers, Lewis Grassic Gibbon, whose love of the land, the earth and the communities that worked it so evocatively depicted in the Doric of Sunset Song and the other books of the Scots Quair. The rich agricultural heritage of the Mearns that he depicts and of Strathmore lives on and is vital for our country's food security. We have the Angus Glens of Glenesk, Lee, Lethnot and Ogill, each stunning in their own right, leading up to the Cairngorms National Park, including the easternmost Monroe, Mount Keene. We have the small city of Brecon, rich in medieval heritage and the birthplace of Sir Robert Watson-Watt, inventor of radar. Just down the road, we have Forfar, home of the Delicia Forfar Bridie, historically a major manufacturing hub and linen and jute, and Ramsey Ladders. On the coastal southernmost point, we have Montrose, with its working port so vital for offshore support in both the oil and gas industry, and now with the emerging renewables and offshore wind maintenance and support operations, plus the impressive Montrose Basin, the largest inland saltwater basin in the UK, attracting over 100,000 migratory birds each year. All these places are beautiful and quintessentially characteristic of the northeast of Scotland, from the North Sea to the mountains of the Cairngorms. But it's the people and the communities that make them extra special. Communities that are proud and passionate about their places. communities that I have been proud to represent as a community activist through my local business association and community council, to becoming a councillor in Aberdeenshire Council, and now here in this place. And to the essence of this debate, presiding officer, in the face of rising demand for public services and public finance pressures, there must be more partnership working. Currently, there is far too much duplication, and more needs to be done to share services, and a willingness to work more collaboratively and efficiently, to work smarter. It has to be acknowledged that people working and volunteering within communities and the third sector are experts in their fields, but all too often they're marginalised or ignored by public authorities. Far more respect is needed of their contributions to local life and local services, often from places of lived experience, and concentrating on early intervention and prevention, without which many of these vital community services would quite frankly collapse. And we need to also recognise that, rightly or wrongly, a pound in the hands of the third sector goes much further than when spent by either the government or the local authority. And what is vital to understand is that a one-size-fits-all approach just does not work. Every place has its own needs, its own foibles and quirks, and these need to be taken account of as we make decisions in legislation, in guidance and in delivery. Place has to be taken account of and be respected. For this to happen, culture needs to change. It is absolutely necessary to ensure that there is buy-in at all levels of government and local authority delivery by breaking free of entrenched ways of working, with those staff and volunteers working at the coalface being listened to. And I also ask the question, are our local authorities truly local? As has already been mentioned by my colleague, Alan Smith, as many are geographically so large that they cannot possibly be. To be frank, the size of many of our local authorities are just too vast. Aberdeenshire, part of which makes up the northern part of my constituency and where I'm councillor, has an area of 2,437 square miles, and that's just the fourth largest in the country. It stretches from Braemar in the west, within the Cairngorms National Park, to St Cyrus at its most southern coastal point, and Peterhead, Fraserburgh and Banff on the north coast. And each of these places has vastly different needs. Economies of scale for procurement and management structures may be one justification for such large authorities, but it does not serve local communities well. We cannot expect change in our local government and public services by just tinkering around the edges. We must be bold, be radical in our thinking, and may I suggest, look north to the model set by our Scandinavian neighbours, where local authorities truly are local. Since 1996 in Scotland, we have 32 local authorities, averaging a population size of around 175,000. But, for example, in Finland, there are 308 municipalities with a median of just 6,000 residents. Now that's truly local. While they're overseen by 19 regional councils that handle broader regional planning and development, the municipalities have a much higher degree of autonomy, as well as the power to levy local taxes. And this means that all local decisions are truly local, by people living and working within the space that they impact, kind of similar to what we had before 1996. I'm conscious of time, presiding officer, so in conclusion, as we look to transform our public services, we must change the way things are done and work with our communities and empower them to ensure provision of public services that fulfil their needs. Thank you.
I call Joe Long, to be followed by Zen Ghani.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Let me note that the register of interest will show that I worked until May the 8th for Scottish Autism, a third sector organisation. As Michael Mara laid out at the beginning of this, Scottish Labour fully recognises the need for public service reform. And since the shape of that reform is still evolving, I offer three thoughts that I think should contribute to the framing of these decisions. Firstly, I hope we can ensure that public service reform is taken with a long-term perspective in mind. There have been some useful contributions from Carnegie UK, who are based here in Scotland, and others to our public debate in recent times about the need for our policy-making to look beyond the horizons of a 5-year parliamentary term and consider the needs of future generations. There will, I understand, be pressure for quick wins, in public service reform, but as we look to employ new technologies, require new ways of working, I do hope that we bake in explicit consideration of future generations, whether that be in terms of skills and training we need, the sustainability of the changes we make, and that we acknowledge those kind of technological, environmental and demographic changes that Michael Mara laid out at the beginning of the debate. Having worked in public services for the last 2 decades, we've seen a great deal of piloting new ways of working. We've seen innovative projects that demonstrate how we can do things differently. We've seen cross-sectoral partnerships and collaborations, but all too often we don't see long-term evaluation of the impact, and we don't see the rollout of successful projects, even when we know there's need for systemic change. So we already have multiple evaluations, pilots, proofs of concept that we can draw on across a range of policy areas. So let's not miss this opportunity to implement that learning system-wide for long-term benefit. We don't need to reinvent the wheel when we've tried things that work. Secondly, with that first thought in mind, I welcome the motion's focus on preventative spending. I think we've heard consensus around that around the Chamber today. Like many who've worked in public services, I do lament that 15 years on from the recommendations of the Christie report, we haven't seen that full-scale shift to prevention that so many of us know is needed. People in mental health crisis, young people with additional support needs who struggle to cope in busy classrooms, young people who find themselves on the path to crime or addiction, those with health difficulties that go unchecked until they present at accident and emergency. All of these failures bear a heavy human cost and require a significant resource to address. And I think we're agreed that we won't avert that crisis-driven spend without significant upstream investment. So I look forward to seeing those plans brought forward and in line with the Scottish Government's motion today. Thirdly, I want to appeal for recognition in our planning and our thinking that our public services are not only delivered by the public sector. Next week, we have a separate debate about the role of the third sector, one that I welcome, but it won't help us to think about public and third sector in a siloed way. Scotland relies on the agility of the third sector to fill in gaps where statutory services are not present. And we have to be mindful that if statutory services retreat in any way, that those gaps will get bigger. The third sector provides a significant proportion of our social care services. Not-for-profit service providers innovate, and they provide specialist services on behalf of local authorities and health and social care partnerships across Scotland. And charities and voluntary groups often provide the services that fulfil that preventative function envisaged by the Scottish Government's motion. As many charities grow from particular communities or groups with shared experience, voluntary sector organisations are often well placed to engage people that rely on those services in those processes of user involvement and decision-making and planning that are envisaged by the motion. Yet it's third sector services that are all too often commissioned on a short-term basis, with little certainty about contract renewal. This often leaves their employees on more precarious contracts while budgets are settled and with less beneficial pay and conditions than their public sector peers. And it's often the third sector, those preventative services, that are first to be cut when times are tough. Many third sector organisations are in stressful situations right now, financially precarious situations. And there's quite a level of anxiety, I would say, about what public service reform is going to look like. So public service reform will inevitably impact the third sector, so we need to see the Scottish Government's promised third sector partnership firmed up in dialogue with this process of public service reform.
You must wind up now.
So, like consideration of the impact on future generations and the commitment to prevention, I hope we can build in serious consideration of impact on the third sector when we talk about public sector reform. Thank you.
Making their first contribution, I call Zain Ghani to be followed by Jenny Minto.
I'd like to start by declaring an interest as an elected councillor on Glasgow City Council. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Firstly, I congratulate you on your election and also congratulate Ivan McKee on his appointment as Cabinet Secretary for Public Service Reform. It's the greatest honour and privilege of my life to serve the people of Glasgow, Cathcart and Pollok in this chamber. I do not take lightly the trust they have placed in me and will work hard every single day over the next 5 years to deliver the change that they expect. Before I talk about the constituency, I'd like to mention my two predecessors, who both served their constituencies with the dedication that I aspire to follow. Firstly, James Dornan, who so diligently served the people of Cathcart over the last 15 years. I've seen firsthand how he always put constituents first in everything and anything that he did, consistently going above and beyond to secure positive outcomes for the people of Cathcart. And Humza Yousaf, who served the people of Pollock with passion. Not only was he a committed local MSP, but as we all know, he was someone that served this country with dedication in government and his time as First Minister. Many people across Scotland will also remember the dignity and compassion he showed during one of the most difficult periods in his time as First Minister, when members of his own family were trapped in Gaza. The concerns felt across this Parliament and across the country for their safety demonstrated the very best of our shared humanity. I know members will join me in wishing Humza, Nadia and their family all the very best for the future. I think it's fair to say that without people like Humza being elected and breaking the many glass ceilings that he did, that people like me might not be here today. So I'm sure the Chamber will join me in thanking James and Humza for all they have done for their constituencies and wishing them all the best for the future. Glasgow, Cathcart and Pollock is a constituency like no other. It's defined by its diversity, its rich history and above all by communities filled with hope and determination. Home to communities such as Old Pollock, Nitshill, Darnley, Crookston, Ardenne, Newlands, Old House, Polkshaws, Crawfoot, Cathcart, Castlemilk and Kilmarnock. It's a constituency rich in civic pride. That spirit is reflected in organisations like Swamp, the Village Storytelling Centre, Home Start South, Burleigh Football Centre, Three Hills Community Supermarket and many more, all of which are vital community resources and make Cathcart and Pollock what it is today. It includes places like Castlemilk, a community that has produced generations of talented footballers who have gone on to represent Scotland on the world stage. Kilmarnock, Glasgow's only remaining village, and Nitshill, which has a rich history in coal mining. My constituency also has the two biggest parks in the city, Lynn Park and Pollock Country Park, which is home to Highland cows and the world-famous Burrell Collection. When my grandparents came to Scotland in the 1950s and built their lives first in Stornoway and later in Tarbet on the Isle of Harris, they arrived with little more than hope, hard work and a determination to build a better future for their family. They could never have imagined that one day their grandson would be taking a seat in our national parliament. Their story is not unique. It's a story of so many families across Scotland who worked hard, contributed to their communities and wanted their children and grandchildren to have opportunities that they never had themselves. I'm proud to stand here today because of the sacrifices that they made and the values that they passed on to me. However, this honour would not have been achieved without the hard work of activists who dedicated their time speaking to residents across the constituency. So my thanks go out to every one of you. I'd also like to mention one person in particular who inspired me to first get involved in politics and always challenged my thinking on topics, my former Modern Studies teacher, Thomas Donnelly. To go from watching FMQs and debates in Modern Studies in 2018 to now sitting in this chamber is a surreal moment and an opportunity that we'll use every day to deliver the change that people in Glasgow, Cathcart and Pollock and across Scotland expect. We were all elected to serve the people of Scotland and to improve their lives and the services they use. Whether you support independence or support remaining part of the UK, it's clear from the first few weeks of this session that there's more in this chamber that unites us than divides us. That brings me to the debate before us today, reforming our public services and ensuring our constituents get the best services possible in modern-day Scotland. Presiding Officer, the SNP is committed to reforming our public services so they can meet the challenges of the day and the future. We've all seen from events in recent years that the world is moving at a much quicker pace than ever seen before. New technologies and innovative ideas come into force every month across the world, and in order to ensure that our various public bodies can meet the needs of the future, it's vital that we embrace that reform as a united Parliament. Technologies such as AI have the potential to reduce administrative burdens, support our workforce and improve the delivery of public services. By using AI in an effective way, it can help ensure that public services are more responsive, efficient and accessible for the people we serve. To conclude, I know that progress is what many of my constituents want, and I'm sure that's what many members' constituents would want too. So please support the motion and let's ensure that our public services are fit for the future.
I call Jenny Minter to be followed by Gary Booth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And if I can follow on the theme that Murdo Fraser and Megan Gallagher started and Alan Smith followed on, might I suggest we've got Ivan the Great. Prior to moving to Argyll and Bute, I lived in Glasgow and worked for BBC Scotland. I had the pleasure of using my skills as an accountant to empower people to make programmes as creatively and efficiently as possible and give best value to the audience. I've never made a television or radio programme in my life, but I know that when I had to provide business plans or budgets, the best people to give me the right information to crunch the numbers were the programme makers themselves. I believe I created an atmosphere of collaboration, not competition, between different programme makers. I believe I gained their trust. Therefore, I believe that learning from those on the front line can drive change and make progress. Isla has been my home for the last 15 years. What struck me when I first moved there was the importance that the public sector plays in rural and island communities. You're closer to it. You see the consequences of public sector decision-making. You know the refuse collectors, the teachers live up the road from you, and you bump into the doctor in the co-op. The public sector, carrying out the services we all need, is the beating heart of small communities, and I thank them for their work. I would argue it is these people carrying out these services who know where efficiencies can be achieved. And I agree with the Cabinet Secretary regarding how organisations need to be structured to allow this dialogue. When I served in government, I visited NHS Ayrshire and Arran with the Women's Health Champion, Professor Glazier. There we saw two amazing examples of small teams working together to find ways of integrating disciplines, using new technologies to improve women's health and changing culture. They knew they had no more budget, but they also knew that by utilising the budget differently, they could invest in prevention and improve women's health, exactly what Joe Long was talking about. And I would also like to highlight Hospital at Home, which is very successful within my community as well. I support the new thinking around subnational planning in our NHS to spread this good practice, but having listened to constituents, I have the following observation. When it comes to specialisms like hip and knee replacements, a national service is the way forward. However, when it comes to kidney dialysis, the service should, in my view, be local. I have seen the difference the dialysis service in the Isle of Bute has made there compared to my constituents in Lorne and the Isles who have to travel to Fort William. I hope this distinction is recognised by the Government and acted upon by the Cabinet Secretaries. During the election campaign, I attended many hustings. One of the questions that always came up was ferries. It was clear from the questions that the triangle of CalMac, CMAL and Transport Scotland does not work. I'm pleased that in our manifesto there is a commitment to look at this. One suggestion, the Norwegian operating model, was considered, and I hope that both Mr McKee and Mr Flynn will take this on board, so to speak. I want to finish with mentioning the fantastic third sector. I strongly believe that they will help to provide the answers to many of our questions, as others have said. They understand the people they support, they are willing to find innovative ways of working, and they are trusted by communities, as Don Black mentioned. I attended a fashion show in Oban in March, 4 local third sector organisations coming together to collaborate, not compete, to raise funds for the amazing work they do across the Oban area. It was fun, it was colourful, and it had a clear message. Look what we can do if we are empowered to pool our scarce resources. I would advocate for a memorandum of understanding between statutory bodies and the third sector to enable this collaboration, and I absolutely recognise what David Green was saying about Highland Hospice. In the time I've left, I'm just going to drop some pebbles into the pool and hope that the ripples they create will shift public service reform the right way. Don Black was absolutely correct to talk about Marie Goujon and the work that she did in the Good Food Nation, how that really empowers local procurement and also community wealth building. One suggestion I had from Argyll and Bute Council was looking at childminding, and could they perhaps look after children out with their homes. I also think, as others have said, we have to move away from yearly budget allocations, and I also think, as I mentioned in the Chamber yesterday, simpler forms. I think we've also got to listen directly to communities who find solutions to situations. Tyree has a community vet, a solar array, a local carers community interest company, all things that local people are trying to do to change the way that their community operates. Presiding Officer, as you know, I'm trying to bring Gaelic into the Chamber. There is a proverb that I hope the Cabinet Secretary and others will take note of, and also recognise the importance of our public service teams in Scotland. And Rud Anir Guma, Hir Avul. What is well done will be shown by results. Thank you.
Thank you. The last of the open debate, I call Gary Booth, who is making their first contribution.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and congratulations on your election. Before I continue, I refer the members to my register of interest as a serving councillor at Falkirk. Most of us elected here have the same ambitions to do our best for our constituents who have placed their trust in us to be their representatives. I am deeply honoured to be elected as a member for Falkirk West, the constituency that has been my home for over 3 decades. Having lived and brought up my family in Larbert, I have been served incredibly well by 2 giants of Scottish politics, Dennis Canavan and Michael Matheson. Dennis from 1999 to 2007 and Michael for almost 2 decades. Both were first elected in 1999 and have a legacy of exemplary service to Falkirk West. In government, Michael made a hugely positive impact, including introducing the world-leading domestic abuse legislation, criminalising coercive behaviour, controlling behaviour, establishing self-directed support, renationalising Scotland's railways, banning the display of cigarettes at the point of sale. And of course, Michael was always standing up for the workers of Alexander Dennis. I don't claim that my constituency is the best in Scotland. If you know, you know. And purely off the cuff, Falkirk has got a deep history. It goes from the Romans with the Antonine Wall, comes through into the Jacobite period, then goes on into the Industrial Revolution. And without Cairn Works, the Industrial Revolution does not happen in Scotland. So yes, we also have the odd thing to go and see. One or two may have heard of a thing called the Kelpies in Helix Park. In the Falkirk Whale, which is just an amazing place to go. But we also have secrets like Callendar Park. And if you've ever been to Callendar House, it is an absolutely wonderful place, especially for an afternoon tea. Been many times. I'll now move on, and while I plan to chart my own course in this place, it is with grateful thanks that I take up the mantle to be the best MSP that I can, and to honour the legacy of the 2 gentlemen who have gone before me. My commitment to the people of Falkirk West is to act thoughtfully, and carry out my duties with fairness, integrity and respect for everyone. My earliest years were spent growing up in Glasgow tenement slums, where life could be extremely challenging, but for the people who were around you. The deep sense of community I have today is growing up from those people just helping people. And I see that sense of community across my constituency and also throughout Scotland. From Cycling Without Age Scotland, based in Larbert, where I live, bringing freedom and joy to people who have found themselves isolated at home or wherever they are cared for. To Falkirk Scouts, who are building resilient young people and giving them the opportunities and experiences to explore and contribute to a bigger cause. To the work undertaken by Keeping Larbert and Stenhousemuir Beautiful, or KLSB, as they are known locally. and supporting those in the area who are most at need with dignity, breaking down social isolation, organising community events and nurture and strengthen our communities. Communities empowered to come together for the benefit of everyone. However, transforming our public sector requires partnership. In business, you must ensure that resources are deployed effectively to produce the best results possible, reducing waste, reducing duplication, and most importantly, ensuring that services are fairly and appropriately financed and to guarantee positive outcomes. Key to this is engaging our dedicated public sector workforce and also the service users, fostering an environment where they can take ownership of change. Falkirk Council has many examples of this, and I would welcome the opportunity to discuss further with the Cabinet Secretary and take this chance to invite him to visit Falkirk and see this in action. I would, however, urge the Government to take forward any action that protects jobs, including in Falkirk West, where recent announcements of losses of jobs at Alexander Dennis and Hesco Engineering have added further pressure to an already precarious situation. Scotland, like any other normal independent country, should have the ability to use public funding to support local jobs, protect our vital industries. Where the Scottish Government can act, they have. But I would make a further appeal that the Internal Market Act and the Subsidy Control Act, holding Scotland back from being able to meaningfully improve our prospects and industries. In the meantime, while the Scottish and UK governments are engaging on matters that are vital to my constituents and livelihoods, amending this legislation should be the foundation of where we can build. And if the UK government is, as we expect them to be, unwilling to accommodate, they should get out of the way and let us here in Scotland do the right thing, the right way, for the right reasons and for the benefit of our businesses, our families and our communities, because that is what our constituents expect us to do. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
We now move to closing speeches. I can inform the Chamber that we are running behind, so if I could ask those not making a first contribution to stick strictly to their times, it would be very helpful. So I called Andrew Baxter for 4 minutes, to be followed by Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The SNP has too often confused reform with reorganisation and reorganisation with centralisation. Real reform should push power closer to communities, not further away from them. But this afternoon's debate has demonstrated broad agreement that Scotland faces significant challenges in delivering reform to our public services, and in doing so, empower our communities and those using those services. So I was heartened by the thoughtful contributions from SNP members in particular, including those making their first speeches, demonstrating willingness to work cross-party. I wholeheartedly agree with Dawn Black when she says that one-size-fits-all simply doesn't work, and that many of our local authorities are too large. If Dawn Black would like to go to my website and sign my petition saying break up Highland Council, she would be very welcome to do so. And I was particularly struck by Alan Smith's positive speech when he said that we are here to redesign the state. That is a bold task, and one, if the government is willing to take on that task, that will go way beyond this one session of Parliament. So the Cabinet Secretary is going to be sat in that position for a long time to come and beyond the next election. The Liberal Democrats wish to work constructively with the government rather than simply criticising. We had 3 simple positive tests for reform. Does it increase local accountability? How will local councils, communities and individuals influence decisions in their area? Does it improve outcomes? This key test is not whether the structure has changed, but whether the final outcome for our constituents has improved. And thirdly, does it strengthen prevention? The Cabinet Secretary, during his Radio Scotland interview this morning, used the word prevention several times. But I'm still no clearer, even after my intervention earlier, what shape he thinks preventative services will take. A list of recent initiatives is simply not enough. The Cabinet Secretary also cites the creation of Police Scotland as the perfect example of SNP public service reform. Now, I know the Cabinet Secretary yesterday looked on enviously when I offered the Deputy First Minister a road trip to Skye. Well, Mr McKee, there's a spare seat for you. So come with me and I can introduce you to police officers who will privately tell you him that they view Police Scotland as the Greater Strathclyde police force, even 10 years after reform. And they will share their experience of his party's flagship public service reform. Following the creation of Police Scotland, officers are still overstretched in rural areas, that huge swathes of the Highlands are covered by just 2 officers on a weekend. They are put in the intolerable position of deciding between responding to acts of vandalism and dangerous parking along Glen Etive or heading to a domestic abuse incident in Fort William. They have to think twice about arresting an offender that would require a 2-hour journey up the A82 to a custody suite in Inverness because the local facility is unmanned or unavailable. For ministers, centralisation can look efficient on a spreadsheet for someone in Portree, Mallaig, Loch Allen or Canusie. It often means decisions are being taken further away by people who know less about the community affected. So in closing, the test of reform is not whether civil servants and ministers here in Edinburgh have reorganised the service. The test is whether people receive better services in their own community. Too often, the SNP's previous reforms have passed the first test and failed the second.
I now call Megan Gallagher to be followed by Laura Moody. 5 minutes, please, Ms.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And if I may begin by congratulating all of the members this afternoon who made their first contributions to this place, including Don Black, Alan Smith, Sen Gani and Gary Bowse. All spoke passionately about their communities and their predecessors. But if I can reference Gary Bowse's speech in particular, because his constituency is part of the region that I represent, and he's absolutely right to mention the jobs in Falkirk and the concerns that follow suit in relation to the amount of industries and businesses that have closed in recent times. And I would welcome the opportunity to work cross-party on this, because we know how important it is to the people of Falkirk. However, on to the crux of the debate this afternoon. And 2 hours on, the Government, in my view, still hasn't properly explained how they plan to reform public services in Scotland. Because if it's not about cuts, what is it? Savings, efficiencies, streamlining. I know these terms well. I know this story because when I was a councillor, and councillors past and present in this chamber will also be reminded that we were instructed to pursue cuts every single year to agree a budget, because after all, balancing the books is a legal requirement. And the Scottish Government, well, they've had no qualms about taking an axe to local government budgets over many years. But while ministers in this chamber have passed the sentence, it was councillors who were left to carry out the difficult decisions, reducing services and managing the consequences to our communities. But that time is finally catching up with the SNP. After nearly 2 decades in government, they have finally been forced to confront the consequences of their own decisions. Michael Mara spoke openly about this during his remarks. The looming £5 billion black hole in Scotland's finances will simply not disappear by itself, especially when this government spends money as if it's going out of fashion. Now, they are now in the same position that they have asked councillors to make year after year. and they only have two realistic options: cut spending or raise taxes. Instead, the government appears to have chosen a third route, rebranding the problem as public service reform. As Murdo Fraser rightly pointed out, the new Cabinet Secretary has already insisted that public service reform does not mean cuts. But I hate to break it to the Cabinet Secretary, but public service reform is precisely the kind of language that councils have long been encouraged to use when trying to soften the blow of reductions in services. We've been here before. And 2 decades on, we're still hearing the same promises about joined-up services, prevention, efficiency and transformation. And that's why I asked the Cabinet Secretary earlier on this debate, what is going to be different this time? What is the point of holding a debate when there is nothing concrete before Parliament to scrutinise? And given the SNP's track record when it comes to delivery, why should anyone simply take the government at its word? The Scottish Conservatives have attempted to be constructive this afternoon, putting forward practical proposals that could help deliver meaningful public service reform. We believe it's necessary, it's the right thing to do. But any serious discussion must also address the ever-rising welfare bill. If the government is genuinely committed to reducing demand on public services and creating a more sustainable system, it cannot continue to ignore one of the fastest growing areas of public expenditure. The Scottish Fiscal Commission has made it clear that spending on social security is rising faster than funding provided through the block grant adjustment. By 2026-27, this gap will exceed £1 billion and is expected to grow further. And this is the question the government never seems willing to answer. If the benefit system is costing more every year, why are so many of the underlying problems facing Scotland getting worse? Every pound being absorbed by the spiralling welfare budget is a pound not being spent to tackle the root causes. The result is a vicious cycle: less investment in opportunity, more economic inactivity, greater reliance on benefits and ever-growing pressures on public service and finances. No one is arguing against supporting those who genuinely need help, but I think when we're looking at compassion, we also need to look at whether the current system is delivering for the outcomes that people deserve. Presiding Officer, in my final couple of seconds, but we have heard a few various different phrases to describe the Cabinet Secretary. We've had Super Ivan, Ivan the Great or Ivan the Terrible. Well, time will tell what version of the Cabinet Secretary will be his legacy whilst in this role. Thank you.
I call Laura Moody to be followed by Max Bannerman. And 6 minutes, please, Ms Moody. Thanks.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As I close this debate for the Scottish Greens, I want to return to the question of what public service reform means for communities on the ground. Because across Scotland, communities are already doing remarkable work. The voluntary and community sector delivers services that are essential to daily life, from social care and community transport to tackling isolation and supporting people through crisis. Around 40% of the sector's income comes from public funding, including over £1 billion from our local authorities and a further £1 billion from the Scottish Government. And that tells us something important, not that they're over-reliant, as perhaps Mr Murdo Fraser's comments earlier indicated, but that their work is not peripheral. It's central to how public services in Scotland function. In the south of Scotland, we see community wealth building in action through development trusts taking on local assets, creating jobs and keeping wealth circulating locally. We see regional partnerships like the Galloway and Southern Ayrshire Biosphere bringing together communities, businesses and public bodies to deliver economic development that works with nature and strengthens local resilience. That's prevention in practice, and that's empowerment done well. And Michael Mara in his intervention earlier talked about empowerment, but communities should have power, but they also need support. Otherwise, it's just passing the buck. We also have to be honest about the pressures that brings. Too often, empowerment risks becoming offloading, and that risk is what sits at the heart of this strategy. Because while it talks about prevention and empowerment, it's also driven by a need to deliver savings. And that does raise a real concern that we end up cutting capacity today while promising transformation tomorrow. In many rural communities, residents are now taking on roles that were once delivered by the state, running transport schemes, building homes, keeping services alive. They do it because they care deeply about their communities, but they do it unpaid, often without adequate support and sometimes at real risk to their own health and well-being. And that's not a sustainable model for public services. And it's happening in a wider context where Scotland still has around 62,000 fewer public sector workers than it did in 2008, all while demand continues to rise, particularly due to our ageing population. Communities are being asked to carry more responsibility at the same time as the system around them is under strain. And we have to be clear about what that means for workers too. Reform cannot simply mean a smaller workforce, more automation and more pressure on those who remain. If this is to be a just transition, then workers must be partners in change, not the price of it. And that pressure doesn't fall evenly. As David Green said earlier, centralisation is fantastic, but localism without resources isn't empowerment. It's responsibility without support, again. And we need to match local decision-making with long-term, reliable funding, not short-term competitive pots. Some communities have the capacity, confidence and professional expertise to navigate complex funding systems, but others do not. The evidence from the voluntary sector is that short-term, competitive and bureaucratic funding arrangements create instability, funding delays and growing stress on staff and volunteers, especially in the places that face the greatest disadvantage. And the result of all that is a quiet inequality. Wealthier, better resourced communities manage to retain services. Communities with fewer resources, often facing deeper poverty and poorer health outcomes, lose out. And that's not community empowerment, it's structural unfairness. Community wealth building must therefore be about shifting power and resources, not just expecting communities and the third sector to fill gaps as the state steps back. There's a real danger that we continue to talk about prevention while budgets remain locked in a crisis response. So if we're serious about prevention, and I'm grateful for Andrew Baxter raising that in his very first intervention, we must move beyond short-term thinking. Community organisations repeatedly tell us that one-year funding cycles undermine long-term planning, workforce stability and building on what actually is already working. So we know what helps. Multi-year funding, flexibility, full cost recovery. Early evidence from fair funding approaches shows improved staff retention, stronger planning and greater resilience. And none of this is terribly radical. It's simply aligning funding with the reality of how change happens. Prevention doesn't deliver instant savings. It requires upfront investment and patience. Investing in youth work right now will reduce pressures on the public purse in the future, whether through welfare, health or justice costs. The Christie Commission, as has been mentioned earlier, told us that years ago, and it remains true. Presiding Officer, public service reform should be an opportunity, not code for cuts, as we've heard from Malcolm Offord. An opportunity to build a well-being economy rooted in place, to reduce inequality rather than entrench it, and to genuinely share power with communities. But that will only happen if we're honest about the choices in front of us, because reform can't be a cover for doing more with less, and it can't be austerity repackaged in the language of empowerment. The question for this Parliament is whether we will step up in the way our communities have and back empowerment with investment, whether we'll replace short-termism with certainty, and whether public service reform will be about fairness, not withdrawal. If we get that right, we don't just preserve services, we build a Scotland that is fairer, greener and more resilient for the long term. Thank you.
I call next making their first contribution Max Bannerman, to be followed by Joe Fagan. Max Bannerman.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I take this opportunity to record my more formal congratulations to you on your appointment and to the Cabinet Secretary for his appointment to the Public Service Reform Brief. Everyone in this chamber knows that holding public office is, of course, a tremendous privilege, but it is an even higher honour when you've been sent to this place by the people back home. Highlanders are rightly known the world over for their independence of mind and spirit, and I think they made that clear in sending not just one, but 2 Reform MSPs to Holyrood at the recent election. I pledge always to stand up for their interests. And I would like to pay a fulsome tribute to my predecessors. Fergus Ewing embodies that Highland indefatigability. He has been a campaigner on the A9 and the A96 for decades, and he will be sorely missed by his constituents. As a new MSP, I've greatly valued his wise counsel, and I'd also like to pay tribute to my friend Douglas Ross, who will be missed too, possibly not by the government front bench, but certainly by his former constituents in Murray and beyond. And though he stepped down from the front bench at the end of the last Parliament, it often seemed to some of us that he was still the de facto leader of the opposition in this chamber. So I wish him well. And finally, I want to place on the public record my deep gratitude to a great friend, mentor and fierce advocate for the Highlands, former MSP Mary Scanlon, CBE. There are some in this chamber, including the First Minister, who will remember her well. Growing up outside Tain and Easter Ross, Mary was the standard bearer of centre-right politics in the Highlands. And if I do nothing else in this chamber, I hope to follow her example of dedicated service in my 5 years here. And it was Mary Scanlon who I recall imparting to me that in the North we do politics a bit differently to the rest of the country. People in the Highlands have no time for endless hyper-partisan posturing if it gets nothing done. Instead, they expect us to leave the party rosettes at the door and be judged on our individual actions and merits. Of course, I'm not talking here about consensus for the sake of consensus, but in keeping with true Highland tradition, I will work with anyone in this chamber and everyone across the region to address the geographical, demographic and economic challenges that face our unique part of the world. Public service reform is key to addressing those challenges. It may just sound like a phrase from a government strategy document, but in my region, public service reform will be the difference to whether the ferry sails on Monday morning, whether the maternity wards in towns are open, and whether you can see your GP without a 100-mile round trip. So let me be clear. I'm a Reform MSP who is for public service reform. I want it to succeed, but I do not want it to be done on the back of my constituents as yet another excuse to push a centralising agenda. And, Presiding Officer, as much as the inclusion of this portfolio in the Cabinet is welcome, the Government cannot be allowed to reinvent the wheel. The Christie Commission laid all of this out, warts and all, back in 2011. So why are we still holding this debate? Well, it's simple. It's because of a failure to deliver. Let's examine the evidence. Scotland has accumulated countless non-departmental public bodies, directorates and other quangos, layer upon layer of management and duplication that no business in my region would tolerate for a week. Reform should mean chopping middle management, bureaucrats with fewer managers and more nurses, fewer strategies and more services. It should mean measuring by outcomes rather than by inputs, by whether the patient is seen and the child is taught well at the local school. Look at Lifeline Ferries. The story of Calmac and Ferguson Marine is, I'm sorry to say, a case study in how public services fail. Years late, hundreds of millions over budget, and Highlanders paying the price in cancelled sailings and lost trade. Now, we all know that ministers can be dragged to this Parliament to answer for these shortcomings ad infinitum, but that just makes no difference to my constituents who want a boat that sails, nothing more, nothing less. And on health, at Dr Gray's in Elgin, where I do declare an interest because the doctors there saved my mother's life, there are expectant mothers who have been sent down the road to Aberdeen or Inverness to have their babies because we could not sustain the service closer to home. NHS Highland, meanwhile, wrestles with serious financial pressures. A reformed health service should be protecting services like these, not quietly centralising them out of existence. So I want to see as a sort of radical reform in this chamber that we haven't seen since the dawn of this Parliament, reconvened in 1999, nothing less than a radical restructure of the state. And can I put it to the Cabinet Secretary that instead of the moniker of Ivan the Terrible, maybe he'd be more comfortable with being known as Ivan the Radical, because public service reform must run in tandem with real devolution and decentralisation. We should push power and money out of this Parliament, out of the quangos, the ministerial departments, into our communities and onto our front line. And we've already seen some of this in action in my region. Look at community wind farms in Lewis, operating without vast subsidy and generating revenue for the local area. This is a community that is taking responsibility and just getting on with it. I will be an unashamed advocate for this sort of thing in Parliament, because there are consequences for getting this wrong. Every ward closed, every job cut that is not replaced by one in the private sector will be another reason for a young family to leave the area. Reform must reverse the hollowing out of rural Scotland, not accelerate it. So I'll apply one test to every public service reform that crosses this chamber. Does it make life better for the expectant mum in Thurso, the crofter in Lewis and the parent in Elgin? Where the answer is yes, ministers will find me a constructive colleague. And I've been heartened by some of the comments today, particularly by Mr Smith. But where it is no, I will stand up for my constituents and hold this government to account. Presiding Officer, can I just finish on a personal note where I began? At my old school, Dornoch Academy, our motto is, in the Gaelic, Le'inarchus is Giacle, which translated means with integrity and industry. This is the standard I will set myself, so that every week when I leave this place and go back home, I will be able to look my constituents in the eye, knowing that I have done my very best to advance their interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Now call on Joe Fagan. 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Officer. My register of interest will show that I'm a councillor in South Lanarkshire. Can I congratulate all those who made a first speech in the Chamber? Can I say that making a first speech in this chamber is not quite as daunting as the prospect of making a second, because the second time around, the Parliament can answer back. So with that in mind, I thought I might start tactfully and indeed tactically with some points of consensus, because I think most of us can agree that a forward-thinking approach to public service reform is about place, breaking down silos to become more community-focused, partnership, the importance of collaboration and prevention, the shift towards early intervention. And I hope we can also agree that the workforce across our public services are an informed, experienced resource, and empowering staff, whether they are frontline or back office, is critical to developing a progressive approach to public service reform. Our amendment is not about diminishing the government motion, but steering a consensus over what happens next. We believe our approach to public service reform can align with our approach to community wealth building, densifying local supply chains, fairer procurement, bringing contracts back in-house where it saves taxpayers money, recirculating local wealth. That can all contribute to fairer, more resilient local economies. It has always been the case, and it always will be the case, that a strong economy is the foundation on which to build good public services, and that is especially true under the current fiscal framework. The Scottish Government recognised the fundamental importance of partnership to the delivery of the public service reform strategy, so we are asking them to help understand the implications for the third sector, to work with trade unions as social partners in delivering fair work, and to observe the European Charter for Local Self-Government already endorsed on a cross-party basis. There is common ground. There has been common ground in this debate with the Government and other parties, with the Cabinet Secretary, who I will simply refer to as Ivan McKee. And I have to say, with some of those green contributions, I think, on community wealth and fair work, although it did occur to me that Lorna Slater seemed to be falling over herself to find reasons to disagree with us, I thought there was a lot of consensus there, particularly in that, in those previous remarks, and also with the Liberal Democrats on their points about localism. But just as there are points of consensus, there are areas of real tension too. The public service reform strategy is a government strategy. The target to reduce the workforce by 0.5% per year until the end of a decade is a government target. Now, I have every confidence that local government will collaborate on improvement and transformation. Indeed, I think the Scottish Government can learn from local government about improvement and transformation. But let me be clear, a central government strategy should not be used to dictate the size of the local government workforce or justify balancing the books on the backs of Scotland's councils. There is a core tension at the heart of the strategy, and that's the tension between cost reduction and transformational change, because transformational change requires either patient long-term change, and a fiscal reckoning is looming at some point in this Parliament, or it requires upfront investment, and therefore a period of double running costs as we invest in alternatives to reactive spending, as the STUC have warned. And my concern is that where this strategy could fall down is that lack of a plan for transformational investment. Can I just pick up, in the time I have, a couple of points that were made in the debate? I have to say both Joe Long and the Cabinet Secretary were keen to emphasise that this agenda is very much about public service reform and not simply public sector reform. If I might say to the Cabinet Secretary, I felt he was slightly more self-aware in the strategy document, where he did acknowledge what a number of members have said, that we haven't gone fast enough or far enough. And can I say to Lord Offord, he made an interesting point, but I think maybe came to the wrong conclusion, because public spending as a share of the UK economy, it's true, has never been higher, other than at 3 points in our history, which is 2 world wars and the COVID pandemic. So why don't we feel the benefits of that? Well, I don't just think that's about quangos and waste. It can't be. It's because it's back to the issue of prevention. There is too much failure demand in the system because there is too much inequality and there was too much austerity, and we cannot go back. It is testament to the wisdom and foresight of the Christie Commission that the ideas that shape the report are still so powerful today, but it is dispiriting to know that so much of their ambition failed to materialise. Delayed discharge cost the NHS in Scotland £440 million last year, a figure almost identical to the reported funding gap in Scotland's health and social care partnerships. The prison population is at a record high, while local government is often having to squeeze those services that give us safer communities. 10,000 children will go to bed tonight in temporary accommodation, while social housing starts have fallen to a record low. That is the cost of inaction, that is the absurdity of inaction, and that is why rewiring our public services and how we govern is so urgent. Ultimate responsibility for reform rests with the Scottish Government. I urge them to act quickly and decisively. As a society, we no longer have time for delay. Those were the words of Campbell Christie himself in 2011, 15 years ago. This new Parliament has to be different. It is time to act, it is time to change, because people's futures and people's services depend on it.
Thank you. And before I let the Cabinet Secretary in, I'd just like to say to members that if you seek to make an intervention, please remember to also stand up and ask to make an intervention. I notice that buttons are pressed and sometimes the speakers don't actually see who's trying to make an intervention. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I think on reflection, I'm probably very happy with the extent of the contributions we've had this afternoon. As indicated at the outset, I was very keen to hear from members, and I think that's what's happened for the most part. So I'll try and pick my way through the mind map I've got in front of me of all the contributions. I think I want to start with the third sector. Laura Moody made some great points about community organisations doing great work. It's something that all of the Labour speakers spoke to. Michael Mara led off with that in his earlier contribution. From Joe Long, likewise, and Jenny Minto made some great points about third sector organisations, as did other members. And that point about this being about public service reform is absolutely critical, and I absolutely take on board the points that have been made about third sector funding, about stability on that, about reducing complexity, about streamlining, about an interesting idea from I think Jenny Minto about a memorandum of understanding between public bodies and the third sector. The third sector is absolutely key to this work, and us putting them in a place where they're not at the end of the line but at the beginning of the line when it comes to fund allocation is something that I think is the Deputy First Minister and myself go into the budget discussions is something we'll be taking and reflecting on very seriously. Sorry, was there yeah, Bob Doris.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. I commend the comments of the third sector we've had in the Chamber this afternoon. Cabinet Secretary, can I draw the Cabinet Secretary's attention to the Social Justice Report on funding of the third and voluntary sector, and commend the longer-term funding that is required. If they're strategic partners for public service reform, they're going to have to be funded in the long term strategically and appropriately. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think in principle the idea that we need to have stability of funding and we need to recognise the great work that happens in community organisations, and I see it every week in my own constituency, is absolutely critical, because that is to a large extent where the front line is, and the ability to deliver for local communities through those organisations is absolutely critical and needs to be enhanced. Second issue I wanted to talk about was prevention, something that Andrew Baxter spoke about extensively, and I've got the invite to Skye. I've also got a competing invite to Falkirk, so I'm not quite sure. I'll probably see which one I can, if not both, I can fit in the over the summer period. But the issue in prevention is really important. It's obviously one of the core principles of Christie, and it's very easy to talk about, and in principle everybody gets the idea. Being able to actually understand and quantify that impact is not as easy as you would first appear. Right? There is extensive work going on in government. Not only did we publish last year the reflections back on 25 years of preventative interventions, not just to list them, and there are many, but more importantly to understand the impact, understand the process it was going through, understand how the numbers stacked up, what the multiplier was, what the time period was over which those preventative interventions made a difference. And that data is really important, and you can rest assured there's extensive work going on within government to develop the understanding, to tag budget lines at various levels of prevention, because it's not just all one preventative bucket. There are many different layers of prevention depending on their impact and the logic model between them and the outcomes. That work is going on, and I'd be very happy to engage further with members that are interested in that to go through the details of that. A number of members talked about the importance of local communities. David Green made and Dawn Black in her first, what I thought was an excellent contribution in the Chamber. And I think that gets to the core, and I think Jenny Minto identified this point about what should be national, what should be regional, what should be local, how big the local actually is. And there is a tension there. I won't pretend that there isn't. There's a tension between how you drive economies of scale and how you drive local empowerment. And I think we're very keen to work with partners to work our way through that. I think we've got ideas on how that can be taken forward. Absolutely, it doesn't make sense to duplicate many times. It's something that can be done efficiently once for Scotland, and that's something we're obviously focused on. And we've saved hundreds of millions of pounds that we can put to the front line because of what we've done on procurement and elsewhere in that regard. But that obviously has to be led by what communities want, what's important to them, what their priorities are, and the decision-making about how resources are allocated. And that is something that we're working through in a mature way. And as I say, we're very happy to engage with others on that. I think Alan Smith had a fabulous contribution. I'm not sure he's so delighted that he got plaudits from the Reform Front bench for it, but the comments on redesigning the state and the fact we've got this huge opportunity in inviting parties across the chamber to be part of that, I think is very, very profound and important. And there's some great examples of working together, and I know that local government in his area is very much focused on that, and some great initiatives coming forward from there, and many other ideas, too many to cover in this contribution. But I think he also had a point that certainly on these benches we absolutely recognise that we do this to make Scotland better, and we do it to make Scotland ready to be a normal, independent country, because getting that foundation in place, rewiring the state, is an important stepping stone on that constitutional journey. Some of the contributions, I suppose I'm not surprised, but they were a bit tired and repetitive, and a bit less in their impact, and suffered very much from a lack of innovation. I'll take David Barrett, and then I'll go on to talk about these other contributions. David Barrett.
Thank you. In moving the Reforms Amendment, Malcolm Offord stated that the Scottish Government should have no remit on net zero and on energy, and suggested cutting public bodies responsible for related areas. And yet, in contrast, Max Bannerman noted the value of community wind power in his region. Reform's plan would see bodies like Local Energy Scotland scrapped, along with their community and renewable energy scheme, cutting support for the often small...
It's not a speech within a speech, it's
cutting support for often small and renewable energy schemes, and cutting support for community-owned wind. Would you agree that's not the kind of reform that we need?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, but I think, yes, and it's also important, it draws an important point there. The inconsistency within the reform position is quite apparent. And I think they talked their amendment about we shouldn't be talking about this stuff and then going to talk about it from very different and contradictory positions. And it just brought Malcolm Offer's attention. The biggest part of the net zero spend is actually financial support for bus fares and train subsidies, and I don't know if that's something, the removal of peak fares and so on, and I don't know if that is a reform policy to get rid of that, and certainly him, I expect, like me, are a benefit of a bus pass, so I would hate to lose that. Frequent user of the bus services as I am. Moving on, I was going to talk about some of the contributions that frankly I've been disappointed in. As I say, not surprisingly. I think Murdo Fraser just banging the same old drum about how you're going to fill the black hole, and every time I answer that, he doesn't listen and comes back with the same point again. And likewise, Megan Gallagher, and I think just symptomises the descent into irrelevance from the Tory benches, just going round in circles on these old canards without any innovation in their approach to how we tackle this very significant issue. I'll take the intervention from Victor Curry. Yeah.
Taking the intervention, Cabinet Secretary, just to ask whether you recall. There we are. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Just to ask whether you recall that Max Bannerman's point on community wind farms was that they did not rely on subsidies and therefore forms no contradiction in reform policy in our opposition to net zero.
Cabinet Secretary. I think the confusion was more broad. I think Malcolm Offord, I think the Reform Manifesto talks about getting rid of all 130 public bodies, or quangos as they call them, but there's also obviously a recognition from across the Reform benches that those public bodies, be it Police Scotland, be it the court system, be it NHS boards, be it whatever it happens to be that they want to abolish, provide very important public services that the people of Scotland rely on. So the Tories becoming increasingly irrelevant, and Murdo Fraser just listed a whole bunch of things that we're already doing. And for his information, we've already saved more than £50 million on exiting. So there's a bit of shouting going on at the back there.
Mr Kerr, you know to try and intervene rather than attack from a sedentary position.
I believe I get the time back, so I'm happy to your point. No, okay, thank you. We've already saved more than £50 million in estates. We've shut 13, I thought it was 12, but it's now 13 Scottish Government buildings. And I don't know, again, Murdo Fraser's not thought this through, because you can only exit a lease at the point the lease expires. You can't just go shutting down leases willy-nilly halfway through, because that incurs more rather than less cost. My final points, Presiding Officer, I think it's really important. Two things I want to say. The first is, I'm going to take this opportunity. I think this is the last speech before the Scotland's men team appear in the World Cup, and I just want to highlight one community organisation I think deserves special attention. That's the Tartan Army Sunshine Appeal, for those who are aware of the great work that they do. Community of interest, if you like, but I think it's worth highlighting that and showing that community and voluntary work right through our country extends as far as what's happening in the US over the weekend. And I think my final point to wrap up is that there's been much consensus and indications of collaboration around the Chamber. I think the real test of that, of course, will come when we bring forward concrete proposals, as everyone's calling out for us to do, and that will happen sooner rather than later, right across the public sector landscape, and indeed support for the third sector. And I would like to think, and we'll refer back to this debate in due course and what people have said when we come to the nitty-gritty of this and taking these proposals forward, that those will be approached in a constructive manner, and we're not going to see oppositionalism just for opportunistic reasons. So on that I'll finish, but I look forward very much to continuing this discussion with the opposition parties and others across the Chamber. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate on public service reform, empowering staff, service users and local communities. It's now time to move to the next item of business, which is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion S7M 00346 on committee membership. I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move the motion.
I'll move and speak to the motion, Presiding Officer. Yes, I hate to disappoint Ivan McKee. His is not the last speech before the World Cup, and I disappoint other members doubtless, given that we're looking to get out of it. I will not take too long. Presiding Officer, members will be aware that standing orders require the Parliamentary Bureau, when establishing committees, to normally ensure that the proposed membership reflects the gender balance of the Parliament. Where this is not the case, I am required, or any member of the Bureau is required, when moving the motion in committee memberships, to explain the reasons why this has not been achieved. Alongside the issue of gender balance, and in identifying committee members, parties have to take account of a number of other important factors into account. These include the preferences and interests of individual members, and whether members have other parliamentary commitments that might conflict with their committee duties. In achieving a degree of gender balance, we are also reliant on the overall balance of members elected to Parliament at the start of the session. The overall balance between the proportion of men and women in the Parliament is not the same as the balance in some of the individual parties represented in here. Taking account of all of these factors, there have been significant challenges to achieving gender balance at individual committee level. However, I wish to inform the Chamber that, looking across all 16 committees, memberships are strongly reflective of the gender balance across the Parliament as a whole. The Bureau are therefore satisfied that we can progress on this basis.
Thank you. The question on this motion will be put at decision time, and there are 7 questions to be put as a result of today's business. First question is Amendment 309.3 in the name of Michael Mara, which seeks to amend motion 309 in the name of Ivan McKee on public service reform, empowering staff, service users and local government, be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are not agreed. Therefore, we move to a vote. There will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.